The progressive left in this state is making a move, no doubt, in that state house.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Nice to have you in. Thanks very much for joining us on this snowy Tuesday evening. Who knew? I mean, I went to bed last night thinking, a little bit of a flurry. Woke up to 6 inches of snow in the driveway, and that always kind of sets you back, doesn't it? So give yourself some extra time is always the over-themed motto from the broadcasters, who then forget to tell you how much snow you're actually going to have. It's not an exact science, even in 2018. Aaron Regunberg is my guest tonight. You'll meet him in just a moment. He is a state representative from Providence. He's a candidate for lieutenant governor, and he's pushing a conversation in the state house that has a lot of people taking notice on a couple of different fronts. One idea is for an income tax of 10% to take care of a single-payer health care plan, which I'm not exactly sure how the math works. So we'll talk about that. And he has taken up a cause to create better access for us at the State House, which I concur with. But he's loaded it up with a couple of other ideas that'll probably make it dead on arrival. But he and I will have a good, hearty conversation about that. I also want to get his take on the PAWS Act, because every legislator has to give us a take on the PAWS Act and the battle going on between the Senate and the House, just in terms of foothold and power on Smith Hill. In the meantime, State of the Union tonight. Obviously, if you're watching at 7:30, you've yet to see it. If you're watching it at midnight, you have seen it. I'm guessing the president stayed on prompter, stayed on message, and probably stayed off Twitter until maybe tomorrow morning, when he's just got so much adrenaline he does something else. But we'll cover the State of the Union concepts and what was delivered tomorrow night here on our State of Mind. In the meantime, in Washington, this headline from yesterday: the FBI deputy director is stepping away earlier than expected, under pressure from the White House. And it just seems to be the way it goes, just the politics of personal attack out of that Trump White House. In fact, NBC reported today that President Trump, in a conversation with Mr. McCabe, after he was rather nonplussed about Director Comey using the airplane from Los Angeles back to Washington the day that Comey was advised that he lost his job. In other words, he got fired but still got on the taxpayer-funded plane to go back to Washington. Trump reportedly asked McCabe on a telephone call about that and whether he approved that. McCabe reportedly said, "I didn't know, but I wouldn't have had a problem with it," at which time reportedly the president suggested that his wife was a loser. His wife had run for office in Virginia. It's not funny, but it's funny, right? With Trump, a lot of things aren't funny, but it's funny. Why would this guy deal with that, right? So under this duress and with his leave schedule, it looks like he's out. Now, why is he important? Because he's a transitional guy. Number 2 guy at the FBI matters. We'll pay attention to it as we go along, but it's just another one of those bits coming from the White House where anybody, anything, and the Justice Department is under siege right now, especially with some of the activity by the GOP in the House, where they're constructing and publishing this memo, TBD, tomorrow or the next day, with the White House blessing, over intel that seems to me to be a sidebar from the Russian investigation. More on that over the course of the week. And on a semi-lighter note, although the Patriots seem to be the top story in the region because of the big game on Sunday, this was yesterday's headline where Tom Brady had told the morning show on WEEI in Boston that he was thinking about not continuing after a guy who participates in that show had suggested that his daughter was, well, I'll leave the language aside. He had been reviewing the Facebook feature that Tom Brady had been participating in. It's a house setting, and the little girl is saying, "Dad, let's go to soccer, soccer, soccer." And this guy calls her a name, which he should never have done. But it's a mistake I think the First Amendment should allow for, and apologies all the way around. Brady, to his credit last night, suggested that he didn't think the guy ought to be fired for that. Whether he returns to EEI is a whole nother ball game, so to speak, because I'm sure they want him Monday morning one way or the other after Sunday's victory. That is when he usually shows up on that radio station. So stay tuned to that little melodrama in the middle of the drama of the Super Bowl. All right, let's get to it. Here in Rhode Island, there's our guest talking about health care, and I kind of, my head kind of was thrown back over this one when the press release came out the other day. Aaron Regunberg is our guest. Welcome. Good to have you.
Dan, great to be here.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
You're making noise. You're making noise. There's no doubt about that. You're making noise. And you got some attention for this idea of a 10% income tax for the funding of a one-payer system. Is this all the Bernie Sanders playbook? Is this what? Where's this come from?
I mean, for me, this comes from hearing stories as I'm going around the state every day, whether it's Providence, East Bay, South County, Blackstone Valley. The current healthcare system in our state is not working for a whole lot of Rhode Islanders, right? Folks are struggling with pharmaceutical prices. They're struggling with premiums that are going up. They're struggling with huge deductibles. They're putting off needed medical care because of it. Businesses are struggling with that insurance obligation. So we've got a system that has a cost problem. The ACA has taken some steps around access, but cost continues to go up. And we also have a system where we continue to not have everyone covered. I mean, it's the idea that in 2018, there are still people in Rhode Island who die because of lack of access to care, and that's a reality if you talk to any doctor. I think we can all agree that that shouldn't be acceptable. So I think we need to have some bold, creative conversations about what we can do to restructure our system so that it works for everyone. And this conversation around single payer, it's one we've had before, but I think it's a way that we can create both universal and comprehensive care and actually get at that out-of-control cost problem that we continue to struggle with. This legislation, our analysis, has an average of $4,000 savings for every family once it's fully implemented. So I think there are ways that we can create a more efficient, logical, effective system for everyone.
Well, I did some of the math, even with some radio listeners the other day when the news came out. I'm not so sure about that $4,000 per family savings. So explain to me what you want to do. You want to hit our payroll tax for a 10% income tax, correct?
So the system would consolidate all the different healthcare payers systems into one single payer system that would provide universal comprehensive care. That means that we are totally removing the costs of healthcare for both families and businesses. So the insurance obligation for businesses, which as you know is huge, premiums, deductibles, pharmaceutical costs, all of those things for families, for people who are trying to get by and get those healthcare needs met. And it would get at some of those administrative costs that keep going up, because that is where so much of the growth in prices come from. It's not anything that has to do with care, with patient health. You've heard that from Dr. Ryan, who's been experiencing it firsthand. So to be able to have a more logical system to resolve that in ways that can bring costs down. There's a cost to a program like that. We wanted to be intellectually honest and say revenue needs to come from somewhere. But that displaces a much bigger cost that every family, every business is dealing with right now.
I'm not sure. Okay, so you're actually, I'll give you credit for bold. There's no doubt about that. But you're literally asking to change a culture of employment-driven health insurance protection, correct?
That's right. And that's a culture.
You're literally trying to shut down the offering or obligation, each company will have its own perspective on that, of health insurance as part of an employment relationship, yes?
And I think that's a system that has some real downsides, right? It has downsides on businesses. I talk to businesses every day that are dealing with those costs. I think it has downsides to workers who they might want to have more flexibility. They might want to strike out and start their own business. They might want to transition jobs, but they can't because that health coverage is so critical. So tying that to that employment relationship, I think there's some real problems with that, and we can open that up. We can have more access and flexibility for folks.
I'm not sure.
Not to mention relieving a huge cost for businesses,
I'm just doing my own math. So let me do my own math. I believe with the health insurance plan that I have, the company pays, I believe, about 60% of my premium. Okay, and my premium runs, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of, with all in, probably $4,000 or $5,000. It's a low premium, high deductible, and those are problematic. There's no doubt about it. When you've got thousands of dollars that you need to spend on your own before insurance kicks in, I'm not going to make an argument that it's sweet by any imagination. However, if the company is contributing its own, say, $10,000 for a family plan, I don't see companies, if you relieve them of that responsibility, I don't see companies returning that money to me. I see them saving that dough. If you make X per year and you have a health plan that goes along with it, I understand what you're saying, that the cost of your own premium contribution obviously is rolled into the 10% income tax because it's eliminated.
Well, and so the payment structure that we're proposing in the mechanism, it's payroll tax, so split between employer and worker sides. And to be clear, like we wanted to
say that slowly. So it's a 10% income tax on payroll. Is it 5 and 5? Is that what you're saying? Not unlike what Medicare does?
The legislation,
or Social Security, where the company is obligated to 6%?
So in the legislation, I think it sets it up as a 80-20 split. But to be clear,
who's 80?
The employer side is 80 right now in the legislation. I do want to be clear. This is a conversation that needs to happen, and you're right to say that there needs to be a lot of analysis. Like as you said, this is a fundamental restructuring of our healthcare system, and so we have an economic analysis on the impact of this specific language and how it would deal in savings with families. We should have more analyses. We want to look at this from every system. We want to be deliberative.
But
I welcome that
conversation.
conversation.
Let me round this up by saying, when I read 10% employment, 10% payroll tax, you're not talking about 10% from the taxpayer. You're talking about a split of that 10% between so the company continues to have to participate in this. All right, you got a lot of work to do on this.
It's a big conversation. It's a big restructuring, and I want to have that. What I don't think we can say, or I don't think we should accept, is to say that the system's working great right now, and we shouldn't be really thinking through how we can make it better for folks, how we can deal with those premiums, deductibles, pharmaceutical costs, the things that are really weighing a lot of people down. The last thing I just want to say, this isn't neuroscience. Every other developed country in the world has a system like this, which has allowed them to bring down costs and have better health outcomes. I think we can learn from that, and we can be bold in Rhode Island.
All right, when we come back, access to the State House. Stay with us. Back with State Representative Aaron Regunberg, who is running for Lieutenant Governor. The last radio conversation we had, I was kind of roughing them up on, and it wasn't you, it's just the conversation came up about access to the State House, and I said, why don't you start with the damn parking spaces? And I guess you did. But you're an ambitious guy. You can't take a good idea and just let it breathe. You got to put child care and online testimony and all this stuff into a bill that will end up being destined for the shelf, at least for the first year or two. I think we should have a separate, like DACA should be on its own. I think we ought to have a conversation about 24 parking spaces up there for the public on its own. 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, where you can park and go see your rep if you want to, without having to, parade a quarter mile, the amount of walking that people have to do just to get into the State House is outrageous. So I applaud you for jumping on that. What did you actually put in the legislation?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you again, because as you mentioned, this originated out of that conversation where you brought that up, and I was thinking my experience before I was elected, how many parking tickets I had. So I think it's a real obstacle. So I thank you again. One of Dan Yorke's many advocacy wins, but it got me thinking about the other obstacles that I've heard from my constituents, from other folks at the State House, sort of the basic practical things that make it harder, that sort of make it a less level playing field for everyday people to actually be heard. And again, being heard at the State House, that's not just sort of a theoretical abstract, that's not like, that impacts the legislation that gets passed, the voices that are heard, the perspectives that are up there. That has a real impact.
People are pretty discouraged by the concept that everything is fixed anyway and that their testimony doesn't matter. I hear about that. In fact, when we parked this up yesterday on the radio, I got a lot of that kind of blah, blah, blah. My voice doesn't matter. But the truth of the matter is, conceptually,
it does matter.
You get very excited over that.
Well, I mean that everything that I've worked on that has passed, whether it was paid, we've talked about paid sick days, other legislation, it's because people have been able to come up and share their stories and make that push. So I think it really does matter. What I was thinking is those other issues that I've heard about, you know, people with parental responsibilities not being able to stay for those late committee hearings, having to leave. Just the way that during those committee hearings, who gets called up, and it's usually the professional lobbyist that the committee knows brings them first, so the people who actually have to get back to their jobs or their life, they get called up last. Things like investing in technology like a lot of other states have, so that we can use technology to make it more accessible.
You want people to be at home and literally like FaceTime their testimony in front of the House Committee on X? Is that what you want to do?
I think we should be able to submit remote testimony in ways that people can actually access, whether that's real time or you can send it in and we can access it. I think that's doable based on the technology we have. We just need to make those.
Yeah, I doubt anybody on any important committee is going to be reviewing, what's coming in over online from people from Coventry about what they think about a statewide piece of legislation. But who knows? I mean, maybe the orientation grows. But I think
there are states that have figured out some ways to use that.
We'll have to investigate that further. I mean, child care. Look, I understand the interesting thing about a lot of your ideas is that they're hard to argue until you add them all up, and then you start to think, does anybody do anything for themselves anymore?
Well, the cost of child care for 3 nights a week for a few hours at the late end, during the end of session when those committee hearings actually, that is, when you look at the General Assembly's budget, we don't need to add anything onto that. There's more than enough money in the State House's current operating budget that if we were to say we're going to take this aside, we can pay for that without it being a burden on anyone.
Meaning taxpayer-funded, no-charge child care. When you want to go testify at a hearing, you can stop by.
There's a room in the State House.
Drop the kids off and let them play with the blocks while you're going up there trying to
Why
figure
not?
out.
I mean,
okay.
and I want to tell you, as much as the parking idea, I think is critical, and a lot of people have said, yeah, that's a real thing. That child care idea, I've gotten so much feedback from particularly younger families saying, absolutely, I would love to go up there. I can't do it because of this responsibility.
What do you want to do with the parking? There's a strip of parking spaces that are literally on the State House side of Smith Street that are all
reserved.
Right. Do you want to make those accessible to the public, or do you want to create a parking lot or build one?
So right now I'm in conversations with JCLS, with DOT, figuring out the best way. I think with that strip, with space set out in the current parking lots that are not always used, both on the State House side and across the street during that other parking lot side, I think there's space to set aside for the public, for citizens that want to go to the State House.
Do you think it's an actual mission on the part of State House leadership to make it more difficult for people to get access, or it's an inadvertent mistake?
I don't think anyone's consciously thinking, let's make it harder for folks, but I don't think it's a priority right now. And to be honest, it's not always, it can create headaches for elected officials, for the public to be able to make their voices heard and be accessed. So it's not surprising that it wouldn't be a priority, but it should be a priority, and we need to push and make sure it is.
Speaking of the JCLS, that's the organizing and financial hub of the legislature. It's been the subject of, I don't know, a little bit of a battle between the leadership on the House and the Senate. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us.
What I really want is I want to have the same treatment for my colleagues in the Senate that the House gets. We're a separate co-equal
Treatment means
branch
what, Senator? What does that mean?
I want to be able to work my own budget. I think the Senate deserves their own budget. As I said before, we operate with a little less people than the House operates.
Meaning you never, do you want to generate your own budget?
No, I want to split the budget that the House and the Senate have for JCLS, and I want the Senate to have their own budget so we can fill our vacancies and do what we have to do in order to continue to operate. Okay. I'm not looking for any more money.
That's government. I'm not sure the acronym JCLS will resonate any further since the last week or so going on, but it is the 5-person body, 3 members of the House leadership, 2 members of the Senate leadership that actually instruct on how the rules and the budget of the General Assembly itself on Smith Hill actually runs. That's about a $44 million budget. It's pretty significant. You're thinking you can grab child care money from that operating budget, correct?
I think that's a big
people.
number.
You do. Okay. I think everybody agrees that that's a big number. I'm going to be asking this of every rep that comes through, not specifically to you because you're here, that you have something to do with it, but do you have a reflection on what seems to be a legitimate, very public power struggle between the House and the Senate?
I think that Rhode Islanders get frustrated when they see this sort of back and forth because that's a conversation that I'm sure there's legitimate points there, but it's a conversation that it's about the State House. It's about politicians. It's not about actual Rhode Islanders and the struggles that they're going through.
Well, it's interesting. You know, usually we're in this Republican-Democratic, national dynamic. This is actually less to do with party and more to do with one house versus the other. Although you are a significant player in what has now become the progressive left identity of the legislature, a growing population. Do you agree to the concept that that you are a player and a leader in the progressive left movement in the General Assembly? Yes.
I hope that I demonstrated that I can bring people together and
okay, but
be a leader.
But you're comfortable with the identity.
I would say, I mean,
the speaker feels like he's under siege. A whole lot less from Republicans and more from you guys, in a much more liberal, expenditure mindset. How much traction do you think you've established here in the last year or so as you've been louder?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'm not so much about labels as about issues and what people.
Well, you had all the issues up, and
right,
you see where they are.
Right, exactly. And so if what we're talking about is a growing Democratic wing of the caucus that's pushing for universal health care, that's pushing for a living wage for people, that's pushing for things like paid sick time so families can have some security, that's pushing for a woman's right to choose and saying that should be a fundamental right that we're saying we're protecting. I think there's growing demand for that among Rhode Islanders. We're seeing that in elections in 2016 and beyond. So I'd like to think that we're saying that Democrat means something in our state.
The race is on. You raising money?
We're feeling good. We're getting a really good response. And going back to that squabble in the State House,
yeah.
I think that speaks to the need to have a statewide elected official who says their job is to be the people's advocate, that we're going to put aside these squabbles, we're going to fight for what actual Rhode Islanders want to see.
Well, we'll have your definition of the LG's position as we cover the race. We'll have you back off and appreciate it. Good to see you, man.
Thanks,
Aaron,
Dan.
thank you very much. All right, final word and we can back. Stay with us. Don't be confused. The progressive left in this state is making inroads. Aaron Regunberg would have you think that he's just super serving your interests and your needs. Check your wallets. But it'll be interesting to see the conversation between Regunberg and Dan McKee as they vie for the lieutenant governor's seat. McKee, of course, already has it. State of the Union tonight. We'll take a look at it tomorrow. And, of course, we'll talk to you at 3 o'clock until 6 on WPRO. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening. See you.